Hey, it's Gordon, and I've got a great episode for you today. We've got 3 topics. What's going to happen to your podcast if you die? I know, dark subject matter. We're going to talk about some nitty-gritty in the trademark office that deals with some stuff that came up in a Facebook group. And we're going to talk about think it can never happen to you, but it can if people are getting sued. And I want to just share a little bit of my thoughts about that. So we'll be right back. Well, hello, everybody. I am Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I am very glad to be here with you today, Thursday, the 22nd day of July. It is just after 4 p.m., and I do this every week here at the podcast lawyer page on Facebook, and also I then republish it on YouTube after the fact. And I am here to answer your legal questions about podcasting and digital media and stuff like that. And today I didn't have any question. The first one sort of a question that came in, but I just had these 3 topics I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to dive right in. If you are watching live, say something in the comments so I know you're here. And if you do have a question, post it in those comments. If you haven't ever been with me before, you may need to click a link that's in the description under this or above this the video in order to let me see your name and information. But let me know you're here. Say hello. I would love to call you out by name and give you a greeting. In the meantime, I am going to just jump right into the first of the 3 topics that I presented and ask you the question: what's going to happen to your podcast if you die? This came up a couple of months ago when a prominent member of the podcasting family and community had a scare. He thought he was having a heart attack, and he went to the hospital. He got checked out, and everything, thank goodness, is fine. But it got him thinking, and he reached out to me and asked me the question, and he and I talked a little bit about it. But ultimately, I think it's a topic everybody should be hearing about. What happens to your stuff if you die? Now, most people know, well, it goes to the people who you name in your will, but not everybody has a will. And not everything goes the way you want it to in the will unless you're very, very specific about that. So let me start with talking about, if you are a solo podcaster, it's just you don't have a co-host, you don't have anybody else on the team, no company, no nothing else, then that's exactly right. It goes according to your will. To your heirs, your estate, whatever. And that's only part of the equation, though, and we'll come back to that in a second. If you are a co-host or a co-podcaster, that is, you're a partner with someone else, one or more other people, then the partnership actually dissolves when one of the partners dies. And the only thing that the remaining partners are allowed to do is wind up the partnership. That is to wrap up the business of the partnership, and then they can restart up again. And if you have a partnership agreement, sometimes there's a provision that allows for the remaining partners to continue the business and so on. But what they're supposed to do, let's say you've got 4 people, one of them dies, the other 3 are supposed to gather up all the assets, the value of the company, figure out what the value is, and buy out or pay, divide up the money and sell all the assets, divide up the money, and distribute it to the partners. Then the 3 remaining partners can come back and reform the company and go from there. What more often happens is the 3 of them agree to buy out the heirs or the family of the 4th partner or whatever, and it goes from there. But you can see it starts to get real complicated real fast if you haven't addressed the specifics of what happens if somebody dies. If you have a written partnership agreement, it can do that with specific instructions about how to handle things and so on. But if you have a limited liability company, an LLC or a corporation, and that is the owner of the podcast, then you are an employee of that company. And if you have co-hosts, you're all employees of the company, as well as owners. And what this does, it's similar to what happens in the partnership scenario, except there's no dissolution. It doesn't have to wind up and close. What happens is the heirs of the decedent inherit the decedent's ownership interest in the company. Generally, though, not their right to be a manager in the company. And so as owners, as co-owners of the business, they're looking to the remaining managing people in the company to do it right and turn it into money or whatever, or keep it going, whatever's supposed to happen. So that's a really good solution. But again, you want to address it in the operating agreement of the limited liability company to address what happens if somebody leaves, if somebody dies, if somebody becomes disabled or incapacitated. Same issues arise if you're incapacitated or disabled, except you're not dead, so there's no will to handle things. It comes down to, who's going to handle your affairs, who's going to figure this stuff out. So there's that. Now, what if you don't have a will? Because a lot of people don't. Well, the law basically provides for a default set of rules. Things will be divided this way. In most states, I think it's to the children and the spouse or the next of kin, whoever those might be, and it might get divided up or might all go to one or whatever. Here's the thing, though. If you don't have a will, first of all, that can take months and months or years to go through the process of the courts with the probate court, right? So that's a problem. What's happening with the podcast while that's happening? Is it going to keep going? Who's paying the bills for the hosting? Those kinds of things. Do you want it to keep going? Those kinds of questions. So it's really a good idea to have a will so that your heirs know what they're supposed to do with this thing. Now, podcasts are often, for many of us, it's a hobby. It's a cost center, not a profit center. And so we don't want to burden our family with the ongoing expense of keeping this thing going. Although that expense doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, you can pay your hosting in advance for a few years and then let them figure it out from there. If you want your podcast to survive and continue to be accessible after you have gone. So that's the kind of thing you want to think about. What's going to happen to that audience? How are they going to be notified, or is the show just going to stop and disappear? Right? You got to do that. Are you going to have a final episode pre-recorded that goes out to your audience in the event of your untimely death or something like that? And then you got to leave instructions for how that's supposed to happen. Are you going to pass the show on to someone else? Again, the will can do that. You can say, hey, I want so-and-so to take over my podcast. And from that day on, that person gets to make the decisions, whether to keep going and those kinds of things. But I like the idea of directing, if you have an estate with some money, I like the idea of saying, hey, let's put this money in and prepay the hosting and prepay these things so that my show can persist for a while. I just like the idea, for example, of my children and grandchildren being able to hear my voice and see these videos of me and those kinds of things after I'm gone so they can remember. I don't know if they'll want to listen to it, but, they might enjoy that. So I kind of like the idea of making that available. So your podcast can be a legacy by which people remember you and so on. If it's a business, I mean, let's face it, if you're making money with your show, then it's more than just a legacy. It's a revenue thing. So you want the show to keep going, and you want to make sure that you've addressed how that's supposed to happen. Does the estate then hire someone to continue the show, or do they sell it to someone with a royalty, an ongoing payment back to the estate? There's all kinds of ways to do it. And so what I guess what I want to say to you is get out there and start thinking about this. And if you don't already have a will, start thinking about having a will. And talk to somebody who understands estate planning. This media stuff isn't the kind of thing that every run-of-the-mill estate planning lawyer is necessarily going to think about or know about. So you may have to be very specific and tell them this is what I want, or speak to somebody who works with folks who create intellectual property, writers, musicians, artists, and so on, because their estates have to handle this kind of stuff. So this all was re-inspired from, I forgot to say, when I was talking about my friend, this fellow who had this scare about a heart attack a few months ago, it came up again this last weekend. You may have heard that Matt George, a 26-year-old podcaster, I don't know where he's from, but he was here in Los Angeles in Beverly Hills. He was hit by a car and killed. 26-year-old podcaster, has a co-host. They have a very successful show. He was really up and coming and really popular and viewed very fondly. Gone. I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but at 26 years old, did he have a will? Did he have this stuff figured out? Probably not. So we end up getting into questions of, well, does his partner, does his podcasting partner get to continue the show, or does she have to be in business now with his next of kin as a co-producer, as a partner in the show, those kinds of things? Does that next of kin now get to be a co-host on the show? Or all kinds of weird questions come up with this. So think about this stuff. Write down some notes about what you want to do and plan for, I know it's a hard thing to think about your mortality, but we got to start thinking about this. This is professionalism. This is being businesslike about our stuff. And even if it's a hobby, you don't want to saddle your family with all these costs and burdens of your hobby, but you do want, to have the legacy preserved and those kinds of things a lot of times. So a couple other things I want to say is, even if you're not going to sit down and write a will right away, you don't want to hire a lawyer to write a will. I get it. First of all, there's something called a holographic will. If you sit down and write out longhand on a legal pad what you want to happen, and then you sign it in front of a couple of witnesses, that's called a holographic will, and it will do the job. It still has to go through probate, but there it is. If you have more of an estate, it certainly makes sense to bring in some professionals and get a professional estate plan done so you have it covered. But if you don't do anything else, sit down and make a list. Start a file or a folder or a notebook or something that says, if I die. Or I have a book called, Okay, I'm Dead Now. Now what? Write down a list of what you have and where it is and how to access it, all of your accounts, and this is bank accounts and other personal stuff as well, but for your business, here's the podcast page. Write down how you access the website, how you access the hosting provider, how you access the other tools that you use, where you keep the files, what the naming convention for your files is and has been, and all of those kinds of things, and who to call. Who can your estate, your friends, your family reach out to who will understand what to do with this stuff? If you have that sort of, here's what to do in an emergency kind of a list, along with all the passwords, and, who knows, maybe you make arrangements for the payment. Write out your wishes. Here's what I want to happen. If you can make it work this way, please do. It's a request, from beyond the grave or from being disabled in that hospital bed. We've just been through a 17, going on 17 months now of pandemic and quarantine and people dying sort of unexpectedly because they get this horrible, horrible disease. And this is happening. People are having heart attacks. People get hit by cars, but it's been a thing recently. So as hard as it is to think about our mortality, I just want to say, please do. Please give it a little thought and be comfortable because you've planned appropriately for what's going on in the future, for what can happen later on. All right. So let's see who's here. I see a couple people watching. Oh, got a nice little audience today. That's great. Drop a note in the comments. Tell me you're here. Say hi. I'm going to do the same. I see a couple of thumbs, but I don't see your name when you do a thumb. So there you go. And I'd love to hear from you, and we can have a chit chat. If you have a question, post it. Hi, Rick. Nice to see you. Rick, you're a guy who's probably got a wine cellar. What happens to your wine when you go? Not to be joking about it, but hey, maybe the instructions are empty it out and have a party. Send me off right. There's all kinds of things. Anyway, nice to see you, Rick. Thanks for being here. And it's worth, look, that it's part of your asset. Now, here's the thing. If you do have a will, even if you don't mention all the specific stuff in your property list, the will dispose of things. It will, your son will drink it, absolutely. It will take care of things. There's usually a clause in a will called a residuary clause, a residue clause, and it will dispose of everything else. It's the everything else clause. But if you don't want if you don't want something like your podcast or your wine cellar and collection to go to whoever gets the everything else, you got to say so. You got to be very specific about these things, because whoever gets that everything else, once they get it, what they do with it is pretty much up to them. So you want to make specific instructions about it. All right. Hi, Ed. It's nice to see you here too. I have another topic to cover now, and we will just switch over to it here. This is a page from what's called the Trademark Manual of Examining Procedure, or something, a TMEP. Now, earlier, the last couple days, in one of the Facebook groups, I have been seeing the question, hey, should I register my trademark for my title of my show? And my answer to that is yes, I think you should, always, if it's a distinctive title, and it would be a pain or a problem for you if other people came up with the same or very similar titles, and it would cause confusion in the marketplace and make it harder for people to find you, for your audience to find your show, then I think you should register the trademark so you can make those other people stop using similar names. So the question in one of the groups this morning was, should I register in class 41 or in class 9? And got into a little bit of a debate with my friend. I'll shout out to James Cridland from Pod News. James has a trademark registered for Pod News, I believe it is, and it's in class 41, he said. And now I generally recommend registering in both of these classes. But James was concerned. He says, wait a minute, now class 9 is for, computer software and recording machinery and that kind of stuff. And I pointed out that, if you really go look and you read into the TMEP, you'll see that it also covers downloadable podcasts. So and that's the downloadable part of it. Class 41 handles the streaming, the service part of it. You can see over here next to, down the line, if you look over to the right past the date, you'll see that under class 9, it's goods, and under class 41, it's services. You are offering both a service and a good when you make a podcast episode. The streaming performance of your recording, when somebody clicks on a player on a website or on Spotify or something like that, that's a performance, that's a service, entertainment or educational service. But when they download it onto their mobile phone, that is a goods. They've acquired a thing, and so it's important that we do both. Now that does mean double the expense because you're registering two trademarks. Essentially, you're receiving one trademark in two classes, and so the government fees go up, the legal fees go up, all of that. But I do think it's a good idea and important because one of the problems that could theoretically, I haven't heard of this happening, but theoretically it could arise that somebody registers their show in class 41 and somebody else, same title, in class 9. And if the trademark office doesn't pick up on the fact that there might be some similarities, which happens, then now you have two people with competing registrations claiming ownership of the right to call their podcast the whatever show it is, So you got to be careful and thoughtful. If that would be a problem for you, then this is the solution. Register your trademarks in both of those classes. The cost does go up, but I'm going to ask you, what's the cost if you don't and you have a problem? So it is important for us as owners of brands. Titles of our shows are brands. Hi, James. Nice to see you. It is important for us to police the things that we own, to make sure that nobody's stepping on our rights. If we let them do it too much, those rights will go away. Rick is asking, does it cost more to list in more than one class? And the answer is yes, it does. The government charges an additional filing fee for each class of goods that you register in. So if you're going to do t-shirts with your show title on them or something like that, that's another class still. And anyway, yeah, so the government does charge an additional fee, and we lawyers who do this, we also charge additional fees. It varies. Sometimes it's actually twice as much. Sometimes it's less. If we're doing it all in one fell swoop, it's possible to find some economy of scale there. James is here. James, if I had a couple of podcasts and was considering creating a company to house those shows, would each show still need an LLC? Definitely, maybe, perhaps not. Is my answer. Sorry, James. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, let me put that up on the screen real quick, just so people get to see what's going on. If I had a podcast and was considering creating a company, would each still show? Okay, so I am a strong advocate of single-purpose entities, and that's because of my work in the film and theater businesses. And in film, we want each film project that we're raising with financing and all that, we want that to be a standalone enterprise, because we don't want what we call cross-collateralization. That is, film A from this production company and film B from this production company. Film A makes a lot of money. Film B ends up costing a lot of money and making no money, whatever. We don't want the investors in film B looking at film A's revenues and so on. So that's one of the reasons we do this. Liability concerns is another thing. Again, if somebody gets hurt in the making of film B, we don't want them coming after film A as an asset. So we keep them separate. Now that's the background. Now, if you're in the podcasting space and you're going to make lots of different podcasts, it can get very unwieldy very quickly to do a different LLC or company for each show. If you have different people involved in each show, it makes sense to use the LLC as a management and ownership structural thing there. But otherwise, if it's you and you're bringing in a team and you're going to be making 3 shows, I don't think you need 3 LLCs unless one or more of them is a very risky proposition for some reason. If it carries different kind of risk or different kind of, like I said, different kind of structure, then it might make sense to be separate. So I hope that answers the question, James. And it's a good question to have asked. I'm glad you did. When we start getting into this on a larger scale, we actually form an umbrella company that will own all of the little sub-companies, all those single-purpose entities, or at least manage all those single-purpose entities. But you can have divisions of companies, and you can, if you can do the bookkeeping and accounting, you can keep it separate within the company as long as the risk from outsiders is handled. And insurance is a good way to handle that as well. So there you go. So we've covered the what happens if I die. We've covered the trademark thing. And now I just want to invite you to join a group that I have. It's called Legit Podcast Pro. And it is a place where we talk about doing these things, getting legit and going pro, taking the actions that real professionals take so that they can achieve the kinds of results that real professionals achieve. And that really is the hallmark of professionalism, is doing what it takes. So James is asking now. So come on over. I'm sorry. Let me get back to this. It's going to have to run the video again. So legitpodcastpro.com. Come on over there and drop in your email address, and then come over to Facebook and join the group. And we have an ongoing discussion in there. It's been a little quiet lately because I've been busy, but it's always exciting and interesting. And we're coming up on our 600th member in the group, which is exciting. And I think I'm going to offer some kind of a celebration and a prize of some sort to number 600. So if you're coming and you haven't already joined the group, come on in and join. And by the way, if you're the person who recommends the person who joins and they mention you when they join, the prize is going to you as well. So there it is. I haven't made that announcement until just now. So there it is. Anyway, James is asking, hold on a minute. Let me get rid of this overlay that's sitting here in our face. There we go. So James is asking, have I considered the Karaoke Show Tunes podcast we discussed? I don't remember the details, James. I apologize. But a karaoke show tune. You mean where the podcast would just have people pop on as guests and sing show tunes or something like that, along with karaoke tracks? It could be wildly fun and excruciating at the same time. Sounds like a fun idea, though. I might have to look at that. Send me some details. Maybe we can figure something out. It might be just fun to do as a one-off or whatever, or do one of these live videos as a karaoke show tunes party night or something like that. All right. One more topic to cover on today's episode. And this one is basically just titled, Hey, do you think it can't happen to you? And when I talk about it, I'm talking about getting sued. This week, I read a couple of cases, new filings, new complaints filed against relatively small-time podcasters. One of them is a very small local, hyper-local podcast about a one community in one little town, and some stuff going on there. And the hosts of the show do a weekly show where they talk about issues of concern to the community. And one of the businesses in that community has said, hey, I don't like what you said about me. So they're suing them for defamation. And when I say suing them, I'm not talking about a little small claims action. This is a 6, maybe 7-figure lawsuit that's been filed against these podcasters. Now they've got an LLC, but they're also individuals in the company. I'm going to come back and talk a little more about defamation another time. but they're now defending a lawsuit. I found out about the case because they reached out to me and asked me if I knew a lawyer who could represent them. And fortunately, I do. I'm the guy that I recommended as I think probably the top guy in the country for this kind of case. And so I have high hopes that they're going to get it taken care of very quickly. It's a bogus case, if you want my opinion. Most of the statements that were made about this particular business were in the nature of sort of opinion statements or phrased as questions. Hey, isn't it time we got these jerks out of here because they're causing problems in the community? And some of the statements were downright factual based on, government reports and things like that. So I don't see how there's a defamation case there, but the person in question knows who he is and will, I hope, is in good hands with this referral. And there's that. But my point really is it can happen. This is not about, hey, I'm going to collect money from these people. This is about a business saying, I don't like what you said about me and I'm going to punish you for it. You don't have to be making money from your podcast to be in the crosshairs of that kind of vindictive attitude. So if you talk about people, if you talk about issues, it is possible. It is, in fact, I would say eventually somebody's going to get their nose out of joint. So consider forming that LLC. Consider getting some insurance, errors and omissions insurance, media liability insurance that will cover you in these kinds of cases. And fortunately, those other folks, I believe, have that kind of coverage in place. But also knowing the rules, understanding the boundaries will make a big difference. And again, as I said, those statements were couched in terms that I don't think are defamatory, even if they are not an accurate portrayal of the true facts. The fact is, the way they were presented is, hey, this is what I think. This is what I believe. This is, don't you agree with me that? Those kinds of things. Excuse me. So, defamation. For those who don't know what defamation is, it's libel. Slander is the spoken word version. Libel is the written, recorded, that kind of. Ed is asking, what kind of insurance? It's sometimes just called media liability insurance, and sometimes it's called media errors and omissions. Technically, they're different, but you gotta investigate. And unfortunately, most of your just basic business insurance brokers probably aren't going to have a lot of access to information about that. So if you are looking for that kind of insurance, first of all, understand it's expensive, but it's valuable too. I do know a couple of brokers that can help. One here in California, and actually she's my go-to, and then she could probably refer to somebody else in your area if you're looking for that. So, James says it makes me nervous hearing those stories of defamation. Yes, it does. What makes me more nervous is hearing of people thinking it can't happen to me. There's a lot of that going around in this podcasting family, this podcasting space. Everybody thinks, oh, I'm so small, nobody's ever going to come after me. Well, my response to that is, wait a minute. If you're so small that nobody's ever going to come after you, then why are you doing this? Right? Don't you have aspirations of building a bigger audience? Don't you have aspirations of maybe making money from your podcast? If you're worried, if you're always afraid about getting these things, getting sued in these situations, you're not going to take risks. And if you want to succeed in business, in any enterprise, you got to take some risks. You got to touch the sensitive subjects. You got to address the controversial topics. And if you're afraid to do it because of what somebody might think or how they might react or point their lawyers at you, then you're not going to do it. It's a chilling effect on your speech, right? So that's why I advocate, get your LLC in place. Get your ducks in a row. Make sure you're doing everything right. So at least if you do get it, you're going to win. And get that insurance in place. So there you go. James says, makes me hold my mouth. Yes. I'm sorry, that was Ed. James was saying about the karaoke thing. We were once discussing our history and shared passion for musical theater and how we could make a road show podcast. Yeah, oh, right. I do remember we had a talk. I just didn't remember all the details. But it would be fun. Of course, musical theater, music is a challenge for every podcast. Rick says, some podcasters don't aspire to making it a business. Some do it for the art or just for fun. I get it. But same thing. Are you really going to make a great podcast if you're shying away from sensitive, challenging issues, are if you have to bite your tongue, if you have to hold your mouth, as Ed said, doesn't that make for a less vibrant, less exciting, less interesting show? I think we all do our shows because we have a message that we want to share. We have something we want to say to the audience. We want to leave that legacy I was talking about earlier. Whether it's about making money or not isn't really the point. And that's the whole thing there is I don't think that the show that I was talking about that's getting sued for defamation is all about making money. I think they're genuinely wanting to, air the public discourse about these topics in this community. And if they're going to be afraid to do that because people are going to sue, well, then it's not going to be as good a show. People won't listen. It's a vicious cycle. So you still have to take some risks. You still have to be a little controversial, I guess to say. So my feeling, you got to know this stuff. You got to get this stuff taken care of. Being professional isn't about being a professional who makes money. It's about approaching things with a professional attitude. So you're confident. So you've got the T's crossed and the I's dotted and the things that need to be addressed squared away. So you're comfortable in your skin and confident to take the bold actions that make us better at what we do. That's my point of view. But I totally agree, Rick. You don't have to want to make money in order to do podcasting is a wonderful hobby, right? I mean, not everybody who plays golf doesn't expect to become a pro golfer. They go out because they enjoy the game or they hate the game and they feel like they have to prove something or whatever, right? We don't all play golf professionally and nobody wants to be professional. But the good golfers, the ones who take it seriously, they play a better game, don't they? Because they've taken the time to learn and study and practice and to get the right equipment and all those kinds of things. Also an art form, absolutely. I totally agree with that, Rick. And artists too, same thing. Great artists don't shy away from sensitive subjects. They don't back off just because people aren't going to agree with what they say, right? Artists, hey, there are plenty of lawsuits in the arts world. I'll tell you, as someone who practices entertainment and media law, we see it all the time. But great artists often do have these company structures. I'm not telling you, I'm not giving the advice about LLCs and things like that just willy-nilly. This is stuff that we use in practice every day. And it's not for everybody. I agree. There's an expense and the cost-benefit analysis may just not be there for you. Maybe you're okay with not taking the controversial stand, not addressing those hot topics. And some shows, it's not going to go there anyway. So you do have to make an assessment of what your show is and is there, cost benefit. What's the risk? So I guess I just wanted to sort of point out that this notion that it will never happen to me isn't entirely a valid belief, I guess you could say. So that's going to be it for me unless somebody has questions or comments. It's 34 minutes past the hour, so I've gone a little longer than I usual. But I'm so glad everybody's here. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening to me cough into a microphone. And I do look forward to coming back again next Thursday with another episode of the Podcast Lawyer Live. Until then, have a great week, and I'll see you again real soon. Take care.